General Motors was never just a car company. At its peak, it was one of the strongest symbols of American power, American manufacturing, and the American middle class. If General Motors was doing well, it felt like America was doing well. If General Motors was struggling, people started asking what was wrong with the country. For more than 100 years, General Motors built the cars, trucks, engines, and brands that carried American families, workers, police departments, farmers, business owners, presidents, soldiers, celebrities, and everyday people. Chevrolet gave America affordable transportation. Buick gave middle-class families a taste of success. Cadillac became the symbol of American luxury. GMC became the truck brand for people who worked, built, hauled, and pulled. Pontiac sold excitement. Oldsmobile sold innovation and comfort. Saturn sold the idea that GM could reinvent itself. Hummer sold power, excess, and image. But behind all of those brands was one massive company that helped shape the modern economy. General Motors began in Flint, Michigan in the early 1900s, during a time when the automobile industry was still young and chaotic. Hundreds of small car companies were trying to figure out what the future would look like. Cars were expensive, experimental, and mostly for wealthy people. Then came William C. Durant, a businessman and salesman who understood transportation before cars fully took over. Durant had already made money in horse-drawn carriages, so he understood customers, dealers, production, and the idea of selling movement itself. He took control of Buick, helped grow it into one of the most successful early car companies in America, and then in 1908 created General Motors. His idea was not to build one car for one type of person. His idea was to build an empire. General Motors would own different brands, control different parts of the supply chain, sell vehicles at different price levels, and reach customers at every stage of life. That was the genius of GM. Ford had the Model T, a simple, affordable car that helped put America on wheels. But GM saw something Ford missed. People do not stay in the same financial position forever. A young worker might start with a cheap car, then get married, start a family, earn more money, and want something better. GM wanted to keep that customer for life. You could start with a Chevrolet, move up to a Pontiac, then an Oldsmobile, then a Buick. And if you really made it, you bought a Cadillac. That was not just a car strategy. That was an economy strategy. General Motors was selling transportation, but it was also selling ambition. It made the car part of the American dream. Under Alfred Sloan, GM became one of the most powerful corporations in the world. Sloan helped organize the company into divisions, with each brand having its own place, its own price range, and its own customer. This became the famous idea of a car for every person purpose. Chevrolet was for the everyday buyer. Buick was for quiet success. Cadillac was for luxury. Pontiac was for performance and attitude. Oldsmobile was for innovation and comfort. GMC was for work and utility. GM also helped create the idea of the yearly model change. Every year, cars could look a little newer, a little better, a little more stylish. That made people want to trade up before their old car was actually finished. This is where GM helped shape the consumer economy. A car was no longer just a machine you drove until it died. It became fashion, status, personality, and identity. GM understood that Americans did not only buy what they needed, they bought what made them feel like they were moving forward. As GM grew, it became deeply tied to American jobs. A job at General Motors was not just a paycheck. For millions of workers, it meant a house, a family, healthcare, a pension, and a place in the middle class. Factory towns like Flint, Detroit, Lansing, Pontiac, and Lordstown depended on GM plants. When GM hired, towns grew. When GM invested, families made plans. When GM cut jobs, whole communities felt it. That is what made GM different from a normal company. General Motors did not just have customers, it had cities depending on it. But that power also created conflict. Workers wanted better wages, safer conditions, benefits, and respect. Management wanted control, production, and profit. The labor battles of the 1930s, especially the Flint sit-down strike, helped make the United Auto Workers one of the most powerful unions in America. From that point forward, GM was not only negotiating with buyers, it was negotiating with labor. For decades, that system helped build the American middle class. GM made huge profits, workers earned strong wages, and communities grew around the factories. During World War II, GM became part of America's industrial war machine. The same factories that built cars were used to build military vehicles, engines, tanks, aircraft parts, and equipment. That proved something important. The auto industry was not just about consumer products. It was national industrial power. After the war, America boomed. Soldiers came home, families moved to the suburbs, highways expanded, credit became easier, and the car became central to American life. This was the golden age of General Motors. In the 1950s and 1960s, GM dominated the American auto market. Its cars were big, stylish, powerful, and full of confidence. Cadillacs had fins and chrome. Chevrolets filled driveways. Buicks represented success. Pontiacs had muscle. Oldsmobiles had comfort and technology. GM was selling a version of America where everything felt possible. But dominance can make a company blind. When you win for too long, you start to believe customers have nowhere else to go. That is when the cracks begin. In the 1970s, oil prices rose, inflation hurt families, and smaller fuel-efficient cars became more attractive. Japanese automakers like Toyota, Honda, and Datsun entered the American market with cars that were reliable, efficient, and affordable. GM was not ready for how serious that competition would become. The company had been built around size, power, comfort, and scale. Those were strengths when gas was cheap and America loved big cars. But when the economy changed, those strengths became weaknesses. Big cars became expensive to fuel. The company became slow to react. Quality problems hurt trust. Foreign brands gained respect. GM still had money, factories, and market share, but underneath the surface, the company was getting weaker. One of the biggest problems was badge engineering. GM had once built clear differences between Chevrolet, Pontiac, Oldsmobile, Buick, and Cadillac. But over time, too many cars started sharing platforms, parts, interiors, and designs. Sharing parts can save money, but when customers can feel it, the brand loses power. A Buick cannot just feel like a more expensive Chevrolet. A Pontiac cannot just be a Chevy with different badges. A Cadillac cannot feel ordinary. GM's brand ladder worked when every step felt different. But when the brands became too similar, customers started asking why they should pay more. At the same time, trucks and SUVs became the profit center of the company. Vehicles like the Chevrolet Silverado, GMC Sierra, Chevy Tahoe, GMC Yukon, Cadillac Escalade, and Chevy Suburban made serious money. Full-size trucks and SUVs became the financial backbone of GM. When gas was cheap and credit was easy, this worked beautifully. But it also made the company vulnerable. If gas prices rose, if credit tightened, or if consumers got scared, GM could be in trouble. That trouble arrived in 2008. The financial crisis crushed the auto market. Credit froze. People stopped buying cars. Dealers struggled. Gas prices had already hurt demand for big vehicles. GM had too many brands, too much debt, too many obligations, too many factories, and not enough cash. In 2009, General Motors, think about how shocking that was. The company that helped build modern America, the company that once symbolized American strength, had collapsed. The government stepped in with a massive rescue because the failure of GM would not only hurt executives and shareholders, it would hurt workers, suppliers, dealerships, retirees, towns, and the entire manufacturing economy. GM went through bankruptcy, came out smaller, and made brutal decisions. Pontiac was killed. Saturn was killed. Hummer was killed. Saab was sold off. Oldsmobile had already been shut down earlier. The giant brand empire was over. The new GM would focus mainly on Chevrolet, Buick, GMC, and Cadillac. This was painful, especially for car people. Pontiac had the GTO, Firebird, Trans Am, Grand Prix, and G8. Oldsmobile had the Cutlass, 442, and a deep history of innovation. Saturn had loyal customers and started as a fresh idea. Hummer had cultural power, even if it became a symbol of excess. But bankruptcy does not care about nostalgia. GM had to survive. After the bailout and restructuring, General Motors became leaner and more focused. Chevrolet remained the volume brand, the brand closest to regular people. GMC became a premium truck strategy, turning work vehicles into high-margin status vehicles. Cadillac remained the luxury brand, trying to compete against Mercedes, BMW, Lexus, Audi, and Tesla. Buick survived partly because it had value in China and because it occupied a quiet premium space between Chevrolet and Cadillac. The new GM was not the same empire that once dominated America, but it was still powerful. Today, GM's biggest challenge is the future. The company still makes money from trucks and SUVs, but it also has to invest in electric vehicles, batteries, software, driver assistance, connectivity, and new technology. That is a difficult balance. Gas trucks still pay the bills. Electric vehicles require billions in investment. Customers want lower prices, longer range, better charging, and reliability. Governments want cleaner vehicles. Investors want profits. Workers want job security. Dealers want cars that sell. Buyers want affordable monthly payments. The modern auto business is no longer just about building cars. It is about financing, software subscriptions, service, batteries, supply chains, and global competition. GM is no longer only competing with Ford and Chrysler. It has to compete with Toyota, Honda, Hyundai, Kia, Tesla, Mercedes, BMW, Volkswagen, and fast-growing Chinese automakers. That is the new reality. General Motors was born in an America where the car was the future. Now it has to survive in a world where the future is not fully clear. Will people still want gas trucks? Will EVs take over? Will self-driving cars become normal? Will software matter more than engines? Will Chinese automakers disrupt the global market the way Japanese automakers once disrupted Detroit? These are the questions GM has to answer. The real lesson of General Motors is that size can make a company powerful, but size can also make it slow. GM became huge because of scale, brands, factories, workers, dealers, and ambition. But that same size created bureaucracy, debt, legacy costs, and slow decision-making. The company that once helped build the American middle class eventually struggled under the weight of the system it helped create. That is why the GM story is so important. It is not just a rise and fall story. It is a story about America itself. It is about how manufacturing built wealth, how workers fought for a fair share, how corporations grew too big, how competition punished arrogance, how debt can destroy giants, and how the government sometimes steps in when a company becomes too important to fail overnight. General Motors built America's driveways, highways, suburbs, work trucks, police cars, luxury dreams, and muscle car memories. Then it broke under its own weight, went bankrupt, got rescued, killed off brands, and came back as a different company. Today, GM is still here, but it has to earn the next generation. Heritage is not enough. A famous logo is not enough. Being old is not enough. Being American is not enough. The next customer still has to choose the vehicle, sign the paperwork, make the payment, and believe the brand is worth it. That is the economy documentary of General Motors. A company that built America, collapsed with America, got rescued by America, and now has to prove to America that it still belongs in the driveway.